I walked into my 30th birthday party feeling like I had finally reached the peak of my life, but I walked out with a manila envelope that turned my entire world into a calculated debt, and now I'm wondering, was I wrong for burning every bridge I had left to protect my future? Or would you have paid the price for a family that clearly didn't love you for free? My sister sat there with this smug, satisfied grin as she handed me what I thought was a heartfelt card, only for me to open it and find a detailed, itemized invoice for $28,000 covering every single birthday, present, Christmas gift, and even the random coffees she'd bought me over the last 15 years. I want you to really think about that number, $28,000 for the privilege of being her brother, and tell me honestly, if your own flesh and blood handed you a bill for your relationship, would you laugh in their face, or would you do what I did and dismantle their entire reputation? To understand how we got to this moment of absolute insanity, you have to understand the dynamic of the Miller family, because looking back, the warning signs were there. I was just too blinded by family loyalty to see them. My sister, Sarah, is 3 years older than me and has always been the golden child, or at least, that's the image she meticulously crafted for our parents and the world to see. She's a high-powered consultant who measures everything in life by its return on investment, including her relationships. Growing up, our parents always praised her for being fiscally responsible, while I was the emotional one, the one who went into teaching because I actually cared about making a difference. My parents aren't wealthy, but they aren't struggling either, yet they always deferred to Sarah's judgment on everything because she had the fancy degree and the six-figure salary. For years, I felt like the lucky younger brother, because Sarah would always show up to my milestones with these extravagant gifts. For my college graduation, she bought me a high-end watch that I wore with so much pride, thinking it was a symbol of her being proud of me. For my 25th birthday, she paid for a weekend trip to Vegas. Every Christmas, there was a new gadget or a designer jacket. I always felt a little guilty that I couldn't reciprocate at the same level on my teacher's salary, but she'd always wave it off with a "Don't worry about it, little bro. I just want you to have the best." I thought that was love. I thought that was what siblings did for each other when one was more successful than the other. I spent a decade feeling like I owed her my time, my energy, and my constant gratitude because she was so generous. Whenever she needed a favor, whether it was pet, sitting her difficult dog for 3 weeks while she went to Europe, or helping her move across the city in the middle of a heatwave, I was there in a heartbeat because, in my mind, she'd done so much for me. I never realized she was keeping a ledger. I never realized that every time she handed me a gift bag, she was mentally adding a line item to a spreadsheet that she'd been maintaining since I turned 18. The tension really started building about 6 months before my 30th birthday. I had finally managed to save up enough for a down payment on a small, modest condo. It was a huge deal for me. I'd been living with roommates and eating ramen for years to make it happen. When I shared the news at a family dinner, the atmosphere shifted instantly. Sarah didn't congratulate me. She asked what my interest rate was and then smirked, saying I could have done better if I'd just asked for her professional advice. My parents, instead of being proud, started talking about how expensive life is and how I should be careful not to overextend myself. It felt like they were annoyed that I was becoming financially independent. A few weeks later, Sarah called me and asked if I could invest $10,000 into a business venture one of her friends was starting. I told her I couldn't. All my money was tied up in the closing costs for my condo. She got uncharacteristically cold, saying, "After everything I've done to help you get to where you are, you can't help me out once." I was confused, thinking she meant emotional support, so I apologized but stood my ground. I didn't hear from her for a month, which was weird. But then she reached out and said she wanted to throw me a massive 30th birthday bash at a trendy rooftop lounge. She said she wanted to celebrate my success. I was relieved. I thought the tension was over. I thought she was being the generous sister again. The night of the party was beautiful. All our mutual friends were there, our parents were beaming, and the drinks were flowing. Toward the end of the night, Sarah stood up to give a speech. She talked about how I'd always been the recipient of the family's kindness and how she wanted to make sure my 30th was a day I'd never forget. Everyone cheered. Then she walked over to me, handed me a thick, heavy manila envelope, and whispered, "Now that you're a homeowner and a real adult, it's time to settle the books." I thought it was a joke. I thought maybe it was a deed to something funny or a gag gift. I opened it in front of a few friends, and my heart dropped into my stomach. It wasn't a card, it was 15 pages of printed spreadsheets. The first page had a bold header, "Repayment Schedule for Debt Incurred 2010-2025. It listed everything. The graduation watch, $1,200. The Vegas trip, $3,500. The total at the bottom was $28,456.32. She had even added 3% interest for inflation on gifts given more than 5 years ago. I looked at her, my hands shaking, and asked what this was. She didn't even flinch. She said, "I've supported your lifestyle for over a decade, and now that you have assets, I expect to be reimbursed. I've already sent a copy to Mom and Dad, and they agree that it's only fair." I looked over at my parents, and they just nodded, with my dad saying, "Family helps family, son, and Sarah's helped you a lot. It's time you showed some gratitude." I felt like I was in a fever dream. The room went quiet as people realized this wasn't a joke. My best friend, Mark, grabbed the papers and started reading them aloud in disbelief, and the gifts included things like gas money for trip to Grandma's in 2014 $40. She was charging me for gas money from a decade ago. At that moment, I realized my entire relationship with my sister was a transaction I never signed up for. So, that's the situation I was in. I was standing in the middle of my own birthday party, being publicly extorted by my own sister with the full support of my parents, all because I finally had a little bit of money to my name. Before I tell you how I handled the bill, and the absolute nuclear option I chose to take against my family, I want you to pause right now and comment below. If your sibling handed you an itemized bill for every gift they'd ever given you the moment you became successful, what would you do? Would you pay it to keep the peace, or would you do something much, much worse? I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of those 15 pages feeling like lead in my hands. Sarah was just standing there, sipping her champagne, looking at me like I was a delinquent account she was finally collecting on. I didn't cause a scene, not yet. I just folded the papers, put them back in the envelope, and said, "I'll give this the attention it deserves." I left my own party. I walked out and ignored the calls from my mom telling me I was being dramatic and ungrateful. I went home to my new condo, the one I had worked so hard for, and I sat on the floor and cried. But then the sadness turned into a cold, hard rage. I spent the entire weekend going through my own records. See, Sarah forgot one thing. I'm a teacher, and I am meticulous with my calendar and my journals. If she wanted to play the ledger game, we were going to play it by my rules. I spent 48 hours straight creating my own counter, invoice. I calculated the market rate for professional pet sitting, for the dozens of times I watched her dog. I looked up the hourly rate for professional moving services and personal assistant duties. I tracked every time I had driven her to the airport at 4:00 a.m., every time I had spent my weekends painting her apartment or fixing her computer. I even included a line item for emotional labor. During her 3 messy breakups where I sat on the phone with her for hours every night for weeks. I researched the cost of on-call crisis counseling and applied it to those hours. When I was done, my invoice for her came out to $32,000. I didn't stop there. I knew that if I just sent this to her, she'd laugh it off. I needed leverage. I knew that Sarah's firm was obsessed with ethics and community standing. She had recently been nominated for a top 40 under 40 business award in our city. I sent an email to Sarah and CC'd our parents. I attached both invoices. I wrote, "Since we are now treating our family relationship as a series of business transactions, I have reviewed your bill. Attached is my invoice for the services I provided you over the same period. As you can see, you actually owe me a balance of $3,543.68. I expect payment within 30 days. If you choose to pursue your debt through legal means or continue to harass me, I will be happy to share both of these documents along with a detailed narrative of your generosity with the committee of the Top 40 Under 40 Award and your firm's HR department. I'm sure they would love to know how one of their top consultants treats family loyalty." The fallout was immediate and explosive. My mother called me screaming, calling me a monster, and saying I was trying to ruin my sister's career over a misunderstanding. I told her that if it was a misunderstanding, Sarah could tear up her bill. Sarah, of course, didn't tear it up. She sent me a long, rambling email about how my services were given freely out of love, while her gifts were financial investments in my future. The hypocrisy was so thick I could choke on it. I didn't back down. I blocked my parents and Sarah on everything. I realized that they didn't want a son or a brother. They wanted a subordinate who stayed in his place. They only liked me when I was the poor teacher who needed their help. The moment I became their equal, they tried to trap me back into submission. 2 weeks later, I received a final package in the mail. No letter, just a shredded copy of her original invoice and a check for $3,543.68. She didn't want to risk her reputation. I didn't cash the check. Instead, I framed it and hung it in my new office as a reminder of what my family thinks I'm worth. I haven't spoken to them in 6 months. My parents have sent Flying Monkey's extended family members to tell me I should apologize for threatening Sarah, but I just send them a photo of the $28,000 bill. That usually shuts them up pretty quickly. I lost my family on my 30th birthday, but I gained my freedom. I learned that gifts with strings attached aren't gifts at all. They're just loans you never agreed to. I've spent the last few months surrounding myself with a chosen family of friends who don't keep spreadsheets of our dinners or birthday presents. It's a much lighter way to live. The moral of the story is that blood might be thicker than water, but it's not thicker than a bank statement to some people, and you should never feel guilty for cutting off people who see you as a balance sheet rather than a human being. Like this video if you think I was right to fire back with my own invoice, and subscribe for more stories where the golden child finally gets what's coming to them. Share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Have you ever had a family member try to charge you for their love? I'll see you all in the next story.